The alarm never woke Jack Sullivan anymore. His body had learned the rhythm of 4:30 a.m. years ago, back when sleep became less important than staying busy. In the darkness of his small apartment in Corktown, Detroit's oldest neighborhood, he sat on the edge of his bed and reached for the brass pocket watch on the nightstand. His fingers trembled slightly as they always did when touching it. The watch had stopped at 3:47 p.m. 5 years ago, the exact moment his son Tommy had taken his last breath in room 314 at Children's Hospital. "Morning, buddy," Jack whispered to the empty room. "Day number 1826, but who's counting right?" He dressed methodically in the dark. Navy blue work pants, steel-toed boots that had walked miles of corridors, and a shirt with Sterling Biotech embroidered over the pocket. His hands, scarred from years of electrical work and pipe fitting, moved with practiced precision. These hands had built a business, wired entire buildings, held his son through 18 months of chemotherapy, and then lowered a small coffin into the ground. Now they kept a 45-story tower running while everyone else slept. The drive through pre-dawn Detroit was his daily meditation. Past the abandoned Packard plant, through downtown's gradual revival to the gleaming Sterling Biotech Tower that rose like a glass and steel monument against the dark sky. Jack had been employee number 7 when Sterling Pharmaceuticals moved into the building 15 years ago. Now the company employed over 2,000 people, and most of them had no idea who kept their perfectly climate-controlled world operational. He parked in basement level 3 in the spot unmarked but universally known as his. The security guard, Marcus, barely 25, and still impressed by anyone who could fix things, nodded with genuine respect. "Morning, Mr. Sullivan. That thing with the server room yesterday was something else. Just physics and patience, Marcus. Same as everything else." The service elevator was his domain, a freight car that accessed every floor, including the ones the executives pretended didn't exist. Jack's first stop was always the mechanical room on 45, where the building's lungs and heart resided. The HVAC system was a symphony of pressures and temperatures that most people took for granted. To Jack, every whisper of air through the vents told a story. Today, something was off. The pressure readings on the east side were fluctuating just slightly, but enough to notice if you'd been listening to buildings breathe for 30 years. Jack pulled out his tablet, not the latest model, but one he'd modified himself with diagnostic software he'd written in the evenings when sleep wouldn't come. The problem revealed itself in minutes, a damper motor starting to fail on floor 37. It would probably last another month before anyone else noticed, but Jack made a note to replace it today. Preventive maintenance was like preventive medicine. By the time symptoms showed, the disease had already taken hold. He was adjusting the control panel when he heard a sound that didn't belong. Metal on metal, deliberate and careful, coming from the roof access ladder. Jack had been in enough buildings at enough strange hours to know the difference between authorized presence and someone who shouldn't be there. He moved quietly, a big man who learned to be silent in hospital corridors where sleeping children shouldn't be disturbed. The ladder led to a restricted area, the helicopter pad that hadn't been used since the company stopped executive flights 2 years ago. Jack climbed carefully, his knees protesting with the honesty of 52 years. What he found at the top stopped him cold. A young girl, maybe 9 years old, sat surrounded by mechanical parts spread on a canvas tarp. Her small hands worked with surprising skill, assembling what Jack recognized immediately as a scale model helicopter rotor assembly. But this wasn't a toy. The precision of the parts, the way she balanced the blades, the careful attention to mechanical detail spoke of someone who understood machines at a level that most adults never reached. She didn't notice him at first, too absorbed in her work. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she wore what looked like a school uniform under a too large windbreaker. Jack recognized her from the company photos in the lobby, Emma Sterling, daughter of CEO Margaret Sterling. The girl who, according to building gossip, hadn't spoken a word since her father was killed in Syria 5 months ago. Jack stood perfectly still watching her work. She was building more than a model. She was reconstructing something specific. The color scheme, the particular modification to the tail rotor, the numbers she'd carefully painted on the side N435SBU. Jack knew that designation. He'd been on duty the day William Sterling had lifted off from this very pad for the last time, heading to a medical mission that would end with an IED on a mountain road. The girl suddenly looked up, her eyes wide with the fear of being caught. Jack expected her to run, but she froze her hands, still holding the delicate rotor assembly. They stared at each other across 20 feet of weathered concrete and 5 months of grief. Slowly, Jack reached into his pocket and pulled out Tommy's watch. It caught the first ray of sunrise breaking over the Detroit River. He held it up, letting her see it clearly, then placed it back in his pocket and spoke in the voice he'd once used to calm frightened children. The blade angle's off by about 2 degrees. That'll create a wobble at speed. He pointed to her model. Your dad would have noticed that. He was a pilot, right? They always notice things like that. Emma's mouth opened slightly, but no words came. Instead, she looked down at her model, then back at Jack, a question in her eyes. May I? Jack asked, gesturing toward her workspace. She nodded just barely. Jack approached slowly and sat down cross-legged, despite his protesting joints maintaining a respectful distance. He studied her work with the eye of someone who'd spent a lifetime understanding how things fit together. This is good work. Really good. But here, he pointed without touching, if you adjust this linkage, you'll get better control response. Emma watched as he pulled out a small multi-tool from his pocket, the same one he'd carried for 20 years, and made a tiny adjustment to demonstrate. Her eyes followed every movement, absorbing the knowledge like someone desperately thirsty, finally finding water. They sat in silence as the sun climbed higher, two people who understood that sometimes the most important things couldn't be fixed with words. After 10 minutes, Jack stood, his knees crackling like old wood. I need to check the chillers on 37, but if you need better tools. He set down a small leather pouch worn smooth from decades of use. These were my son's. He was going to be an engineer. Would have been about your age now, maybe a little older. He turned to leave, then paused. This area is supposed to be restricted, but the security camera's been broken for 2 years. Budget cuts, they say. I've been meaning to fix it, but somehow I never get around to it, especially between 6 and 7 in the morning. Jack climbed back down the ladder, leaving Emma Sterling alone with her mechanical prayers and a set of tools that had once belonged to another child who'd run out of time to use them. The rest of Jack's morning followed its usual pattern, but his mind kept returning to the girl on the roof. At 7:45, he was in the executive floor's mechanical room, replacing filters in the air handling units, when he heard the distinctive click of expensive heels on marble. Margaret Sterling's voice carried through the ventilation shaft, tight with barely controlled frustration. No, Dr. Morrison, she hasn't improved. She still won't speak, not to me, not to her teachers, not to any of the therapists you've recommended. A pause. Yes, we've tried art therapy, music therapy, play therapy. Nothing works. She just builds those models and draws blueprints. Jack continued his work, but his hands moved more quietly. He'd learned long ago that buildings told you secrets if you knew how to listen. I don't care what it costs. Margaret's voice cracked slightly. I just want my daughter back. The board's already questioning my ability to lead if I can't even... She didn't finish the sentence. The conversation ended with the sharp tap of heels walking away. Jack finished replacing the filters, but his mind was elsewhere. He thought about Tommy in those last months, how the boy had stopped talking about the future and started taking apart and rebuilding every toy he owned, as if understanding how things worked might help him understand why his own body was failing. At lunch, instead of eating in the maintenance break room, Jack found himself in the building's library, a corporate vanity project on the 10th floor that hardly anyone used. He pulled up articles on selective mutism, on childhood trauma, on the ways grief manifested in children. The medical terminology washed over him, but one phrase kept appearing: safe person phenomenon. Sometimes a traumatized child would choose one person, often unexpected, with whom they felt safe enough to begin communicating. His phone buzzed. A text from Linda, his ex-wife, the first communication in 6 months. Saw you on Woodward yesterday. You looked good. Healthy. I'm glad. Jack stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. What was there to say? That healthy was just another word for functional? That he'd learned to carry grief like a tool on his belt? Always there, but useful if you knew how to use it. The afternoon brought the kind of crisis that made Jack indispensable. The building's entire security system, a $2 million biometric marvel installed just 6 months ago, suddenly stopped recognizing anyone. Employees were trapped in lobbies, executives couldn't access their offices, and the head of IT was having what looked like a panic attack in the main lobby. It's impossible. The young man kept saying laptop balanced on his arm as he frantically typed. The system's working perfectly, all green lights, but it won't authenticate anyone. Thomas Bradley, VP of Operations, stood nearby with barely concealed satisfaction. Jack had worked under enough men like Bradley to recognize the type ex-military middle management, who confused leadership with control and saw every problem as a chance to prove others incompetent. This is what happens when we rely too heavily on technology, Bradley announced to anyone listening. In my day, a lock and key worked just fine. Jack approached the main panel, ignoring Bradley's dismissive look. He placed his hand on the wall beside the scanner, feeling for something invisible to everyone else. There it was, a subtle vibration, barely perceptible. He'd noticed it yesterday when the new elevator motors were installed. The magnetic field from the new elevator motors, Jack said, pulling out his modified tablet. They're interfering with the biometric sensors. The installers ran the elevator power cables too close to the security system's data lines. The IT head looked at him like he'd spoken ancient Greek. That's not possible. The shielding should prevent that. Shielding degrades over time, especially if it's cheap Chinese cable trying to pass for American-made. Jack was already unscrewing an access panel. Give me 20 minutes. It took him 18, using nothing more sophisticated than aluminum foil from the cafeteria and some creative rerouting. Jack created an electromagnetic barrier between the two systems. When he pressed his thumb to the scanner, it chirped green immediately. How did you know? The IT head asked, genuine awe in his voice. 30 years of fixing things that weren't supposed to break, Jack replied, packing up his tools. Technology changes, but physics doesn't. Interference is interference, whether it's in a 1990s radio or a 2024 computer. Bradley's face had turned an interesting shade of red, but before he could speak, a small hand tugged at Jack's sleeve. He looked down to find Emma Sterling holding a rolled-up paper. She held it out to him, then walked away quickly before anyone could react. Jack unrolled it after she'd gone. It was a blueprint drawn with the precision of someone who understood technical drawing but executed with a child's hand. The design was for some kind of stabilization system, but more interesting was the note in the corner, written in careful cursive, for the wobble. Page 347 in your book might help. Jack didn't own any books that would help with mechanical problems, but Tommy had. His son's collection of engineering texts still sat in boxes in Jack's basement unopened for 5 years. Page 347 would be from Principles of Rotary Wing Aircraft. The book Tommy had been reading in the hospital, asking Jack to explain concepts between morphine doses. That evening, Jack made 2 stops on his way home. First, his basement storage unit, where he finally opened the box marked Tommy's books. Page 347 discussed gyroscopic precession in helicopter rotors, but more importantly, pressed between the pages was a drawing Tommy had made a helicopter with Dad and me, written on the side, flying above the clouds where nothing hurts anymore. The second stop was a hardware store where Jack bought materials he hadn't purchased in years: brass fittings, precision bearings, small gauge wire. His hands remembered the motions, even if his heart had forgotten the reasons. That night in his apartment, Jack began to build. Not a model helicopter, but something else, a gyroscopic stabilizer that could work on any scale from a toy to the real thing. It was the kind of project he and Tommy would have done together, the kind that taught patience and precision and the satisfaction of making something work. As he worked, Jack thought about Emma Sterling on that roof, rebuilding her father's last flight over and over, trying to find the moment where she could change the ending. He thought about Margaret Sterling's voice through the vents breaking over her daughter's silence. He thought about his own silence, the words he'd never said to Tommy, because there would always be tomorrow until there wasn't. At 2 a.m., the stabilizer was complete. Jack held it up to the light, watching the precisely balanced weights spin in perfect harmony. Tomorrow he would leave it where Emma would find it, along with a note of his own. The wobble isn't in the blade, it's in the heart. Both can be fixed with the right tools and enough patience. Outside his window, Detroit's lights flickered like dying stars, each one a story of something that once burned bright. The city understood loss, understood the slow work of rebuilding. Jack Sullivan understood it too now. He'd been running from grief for 5 years, but Emma Sterling had shown him something different, that broken didn't mean finished. The next morning would bring new challenges. Thomas Bradley was already building his case for outsourcing maintenance. seeing Jack as an expensive relic in an age of automated building management systems. Margaret Sterling would face another day of her daughter's silence and the board's growing concern. Emma would return to that roof searching for her father in the precise angle of rotor blades. But tonight Jack Sullivan had built something with purpose for the first time since Tommy's death. And tomorrow morning at 6 he would climb that ladder again, carrying a stabilizer and the beginning of understanding that some things couldn't be fixed, only balanced differently. The building systems hummed their nighttime chorus around him, each sound a note in the symphony of functioning machinery. Somewhere in that vast structure, a little girl was probably still awake, drawing blueprints in the dark, speaking in the only language that didn't hurt. Jack's last thought before sleep was something Tommy used to say when they'd finish a particularly difficult project. "We did good, Dad. We did real good." Tomorrow he would teach Emma Sterling that same phrase. But first she would have to learn to speak again. And Jack Sullivan, the invisible man who kept the building alive, would have to remember how to teach. The morning Thomas Bradley called his first efficiency meeting was the same morning Emma Sterling left her second gift for Jack. He found it tucked behind the maintenance log in the mechanical room, a detailed schematic for an improved dampener system, drawn with the meticulous care of someone who understood that precision was a form of respect. At the bottom in her careful handwriting, "The building sounds sick on the east side. This might help." She was right. Jack had noticed the harmonic vibration 3 weeks ago, a subtle wrongness in the building's breathing that would eventually lead to bearing failure in the air handlers. Emma had not only heard it but diagnosed it correctly. The solution she proposed was elegant, using counterweights to neutralize the vibration rather than replacing expensive components. It was the kind of fix an engineer with decades of experience might devise, drawn by a 9-year-old who couldn't or wouldn't speak. Jack was studying the drawing when his phone buzzed. All maintenance staff were to report to Conference Room B immediately. He folded Emma's schematic carefully and placed it in his chest pocket next to Tommy's watch. Conference Room B smelled like ambition and aftershave. Thomas Bradley stood at the head of the table, his posture military, straight, a PowerPoint presentation glowing behind him, showing graphs and charts that reduced 30 years of keeping buildings alive to simple cost-benefit ratios. The entire maintenance crew was there. Roberto, the plumber who'd worked alongside Jack for 15 years. Mike, the electrician who joined them straight from trade school. Sarah, their HVAC specialist who could diagnose problems by sound alone. And 4 others who kept Sterling Biotech running while its occupants pursued miracles in laboratories. "Gentlemen and lady," Bradley began his tone, suggesting he'd added the last part reluctantly. "Sterling Biotech spends $2.3 million annually on building maintenance. That's a significant expenditure for a company facing market pressures and increased competition." Jack watched his crew shift uncomfortably. They were workers, not corporate warriors. They spoke the language of pipe fittings and circuit breakers, not spreadsheets and synergy. Bradley clicked to the next slide. "Midwest Building Solutions has offered to handle all maintenance needs for $1.8 million annually. That's a savings of $500,000 that could be redirected to research and development." "Midwest Building Solutions," Roberto muttered. "That's your brother's company, isn't it, Mr. Bradley?" The room went silent. Bradley's jaw tightened. "My family connections are irrelevant to the financial benefits. The numbers speak for themselves." "Numbers don't fix burst pipes at 2 a.m., Sarah said quietly. "Numbers don't know that the lab freezers on floor 23 run 2 degrees warmer on humid days and need manual adjustment to protect specimens." "That's exactly the kind of inefficiency I'm talking about," Bradley countered. "Modern systems don't require that kind of babysitting." Jack finally spoke. "Mr. Bradley, how long have you been in this building?" "6 months. But I fail to see." "I've been here 15 years. Roberto's 17. Between the 7 of us, we have over a century of experience with this specific building. We know every pipe, every wire, every quirk and whisper." Jack stood slowly, his hands flat on the table. "Your brother's company might save money on paper, but when they don't know that the emergency generator needs a manual prime after a cold start, or that the server room's backup cooling has to be sequenced in a specific order, or that the CEO's daughter—" He stopped himself. "The CEO's daughter. What?" Bradley's eyes sharpened. Jack met his gaze steadily. The CEO's daughter's lab uses specialized equipment that's sensitive to power fluctuations. We've installed custom regulators that aren't in any building specs. It was a lie wrapped in truth. Margaret Sterling's daughter didn't have a lab, but Bradley didn't know that. What Emma had was a grieving mother and a building full of people who'd learned to work around her silence. We'll discuss this further after I've reviewed more proposals, Bradley said, dismissing them with a wave. As they filed out, Roberto grabbed Jack's arm. Thanks for speaking up, Jefe, but you know he's gunning for you now, right? Let him come, Jack replied, but his mind was elsewhere. Through the conference room's glass wall, he could see Margaret Sterling in her office shoulders, bent over her desk like she was carrying the entire building on her back. That afternoon brought an unexpected visitor to the mechanical room. Jack was recalibrating pressure sensors when he heard footsteps lighter than any of his crews. He turned to find Margaret Sterling herself looking out of place in her executive suit among the industrial pipes and ventilation units. Mrs. Sterling, Jack straightened unconsciously, wiping his hands on his pants. Is there a problem with your office climate control? No, Mr. Sullivan. The temperature's perfect as always. She seemed to be searching for words, this woman who commanded boardrooms and negotiated million-dollar deals. I wanted to ask you about something. Yesterday, the security system failure. You fixed it when our entire IT department couldn't. Just experience, ma'am. It's more than that. She moved closer, and Jack could see the exhaustion beneath her professional makeup. This morning, I found something on my desk. A small mechanical bird. When wound up, it flies in perfect circles and lands exactly where it started. There was a note from someone learning to fly again. Jack kept his expression neutral, but his hand moved unconsciously to his pocket where Emma's drawings rested. Margaret continued, My daughter hasn't spoken in 5 months. She hasn't given me anything. Not a drawing, not a gift, nothing. But someone is teaching her to communicate again, even if it's through gears and springs. Kids find their own way through grief, Jack said carefully. Do they? Margaret's composure cracked slightly. Because I'm losing her, Mr. Sullivan. Every day she slips further away, and I don't know how to reach her. The therapists say to give her time, but how much time does she have before she disappears completely? Before Jack could answer, his walkie-talkie crackled to life. Jack, we got a problem in the lab freezer floor 23. The whole system's down. Margaret's face went pale. That freezer contains 10 years of research. Temperature rises above -60, and we lose everything. Jack was already moving, Margaret following. As they rushed to the elevator, Jack's mind was calculating. The backup system should have kicked in immediately. If it hadn't, something was seriously wrong. The lab was in chaos when they arrived. Dr. Chen, the lead researcher, was near panic. 15 minutes until critical temperature. The backup won't engage, and the manufacturer says we need to shut down for 12 hours minimum to reset. Can't shut down what's already broken, Jack said, pulling on insulated gloves. Mrs. Sterling, I need you to trust me. What I'm about to do voids every warranty and violates about 6 safety protocols. Do it. Jack opened the main panel and saw the problem immediately. The control board was fried, probably from the same power surge that had been plaguing the building. But the compressors were still good. They just needed to be told what to do. Roberto, Jack called into his walkie-talkie. Bring me the emergency generator's control module. The old one we replaced last month. That piece of junk. Why? Because that piece of junk speaks the same language as these compressors. Built by the same company, 20 years apart, but the base code's the same. It was like performing surgery with a chainsaw. Jack bypassed safety protocols, hot-wired connections, and essentially tricked the freezer into thinking it was a generator. The work was dangerous, technically impossible, according to the manual, and absolutely brilliant. 8 minutes later, the compressors roared to life. The temperature dropped. 10 years of research were saved. Dr. Chen stared at Jack like he'd just witnessed a miracle. How did you know that would work? Because 30 years ago, I made the same fix in a grocery store freezer in Hamtramck. Different scale, same principle. Machines don't care about their pedigree. They just want to run. Margaret Sterling was looking at him differently now, not as the maintenance man, but as someone who just saved her company millions of dollars and possibly hundreds of lives that the research might eventually protect. Mr. Sullivan, She began but was interrupted by a small figure in the doorway. Emma Sterling stood there eyes wide, holding something in her hands. She walked directly to Jack, ignoring everyone else, and held out what she'd been carrying. It was the gyroscopic stabilizer he'd left for her, but she'd modified it, improved it in ways that shouldn't have been possible for someone her age. Then in a voice rusty from months of silence, she spoke. "It works better now. Tommy would have known how to fix it right the first time." The room went absolutely still. Margaret Sterling's hand flew to her mouth, tears immediate and uncontained. "Emma, baby." But Emma was looking at Jack, waiting for his response. "You're right," Jack said quietly, his own voice thick. "Tommy would have seen that improvement immediately. He was always smarter than his old man." Emma nodded seriously. "Was he brave?" "The bravest. My dad was brave too." "Yes, he was. But being brave didn't save them." Jack knelt down, bringing himself to Emma's eye level. Around them, the adults held their breath, afraid to break whatever spell was allowing this conversation. "No, sweetheart, it didn't. Being brave doesn't mean you don't die. It means you live right up until you do." Emma considered this. "Are you brave?" Jack thought about the question, really thought about it. "I'm trying to be. Your dad would have called it courage under maintenance." It was an awful pun, the kind Tommy would have loved. Emma's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but the possibility of one. "My mom needs someone brave," Emma said, then handed Jack another rolled-up paper. "The boardroom's acoustic dampers are installed backward. That's why she can hear everyone in the hallway. It makes her nervous." Then she walked to her mother, took her hand, and led her away, leaving Jack holding another blueprint in a room full of witnesses to what might have been a miracle, or just two broken people recognizing each other in the dark. That evening, Jack worked late implementing Emma's fix for the boardroom. She was right, of course. The dampers had been installed backward during construction, a simple error that had made the CEO's office feel exposed for 15 years. As he worked, he thought about the strange communion he'd found with this silent child who spoke in blueprints and mechanical solutions. His phone rang. Linda's name appeared on the screen. Against his better judgment, he answered. "Jack." Her voice was exactly as he remembered, careful and concerned. "I heard about what happened today. The whole building's talking about it. You got the Sterling girl to speak." "She was ready to speak. I just happened to be there." "Don't do that. Don't minimize it. You were always good with kids, Jack. Even after—" She stopped. "After Tommy died." "You can say it, Linda." "I couldn't stay, Jack. Seeing you was like seeing him. The way you hold your head when you're thinking, that little tool spin you do when you're nervous. He was so much like you. And you were so much like you that you ran." The words came out harder than he intended. "Yes," she said simply. "I ran, and I've been running ever since. But you stayed. You found a way to keep going. Existing isn't the same as living, Linda. No, but what you did today, that was living. That was the Jack I married, the one who could fix anything, even broken hearts. I can't fix my own. Maybe that's not your job. Maybe your job is to fix what you can reach." After they hung up, Jack sat in the empty boardroom, testing the new acoustic dampers. The silence was perfect now, protective rather than isolating. He thought about Emma's words. "My mom needs someone brave." Through the window, Detroit spread out like a vast circuit board in the darkness. Somewhere in the building, Emma Sterling was probably drawing new blueprints, speaking in the language of machines, because human words still hurt too much. Somewhere else, Margaret Sterling was hearing her daughter's voice echoing in her head, 3 sentences after 5 months of silence. The next morning, Jack arrived to find a crowd gathered in the main lobby. Thomas Bradley stood at the center, flanked by 3 men in Midwest Building Solutions uniforms. They were demonstrating some kind of automated maintenance system, a computer-controlled marvel that could supposedly diagnose and fix problems without human intervention. "This is the future," Bradley announced to the assembled employees. "Efficiency, cost savings, and no human error." Jack watched from the back as the demonstration proceeded. The system was impressive, all flashing lights and smooth automation, until Emma Sterling walked up to it. She studied the machine for exactly 30 seconds, then reached out and adjusted a single valve. The entire system shut down with a mechanical wheeze. "Your input sensors are cross-wired," she said clearly, her child's voice carrying across the silent lobby. And the pressure differentials are calibrated for sea level, not Detroit's elevation. My dad taught me that altitude matters for everything that flies or flows. Bradley's face went red. This is a sophisticated system. A child couldn't possibly... A child who understands physics could... Margaret Sterling's voice cut through the crowd. She walked forward, her presence commanding immediate attention. My daughter just saved us from installing a system that would have failed the first time barometric pressure dropped, which in Detroit happens every other day. She turned to face Bradley directly. Your contract proposal is rejected, and I'll be discussing your conflict of interest with the board considering your brother owns Midwest Building Solutions. You can't prove... I don't have to prove anything. I'm the CEO. She turned to Jack, who was still standing in the back. Mr. Sullivan, would you please examine this system and tell me what else is wrong with it? Jack walked forward, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. He circled the machine once, then knelt and opened an access panel. What he saw made him shake his head. Chinese components with counterfeit certification stamps, undersized wiring that would overheat under load, and the entire diagnostic system is running on Windows XP, which hasn't been security updated in over a decade. He stood brushing off his hands. This isn't maintenance equipment. It's a liability lawsuit waiting to happen. Bradley tried one more time. The board approved exploring cost reduction options. The board approved exploring options, not implementing disasters, Margaret corrected. Security will escort you out, Mr. Bradley. Your services are no longer required. As security led Bradley away, the crowd dispersed, buzzing with conversation. Emma walked up to Jack and tugged on his sleeve. The machine was stupid, she said simply. Yes, it was. Machines should make sense. Like Dad's helicopter made sense. Every part had a purpose. That's right. She looked up at him with those serious eyes. Will you teach me more about purposes, about how things work, and why? Jack glanced at Margaret, who nodded with a small smile. Sure, kid. How about we start with the building's heating system? Winter's coming, and there's a lot to know about keeping people warm. Emma nodded solemnly. Tommy would want people to be warm. Yes, Jack said softly. He would. That afternoon, Jack found himself in Margaret's office, a space he'd only ever seen from the maintenance corridors. It was smaller than he'd expected, more functional than ostentatious. Photos covered one wall, William Sterling in his Navy SEAL uniform, Emma as a baby family vacations to places Jack had only seen in magazines. I owe you an apology, Margaret said, gesturing for him to sit. I've been so focused on experts and credentials that I missed what Emma really needed. Someone who understood loss, not just studied it. No apology needed, ma'am. Margaret, please, you've earned that much. She moved to the window, looking out at the city. Emma spoke 17 words today. That's more than she said in 5 months combined. She's finding her way back, on her own terms. With your help. Margaret turned to face him. I want to offer you something. Not just your job, but a new position. Director of Operations. You'd oversee all building systems and have full authority over any contractors we bring in. Jack was quiet for a moment. I appreciate the offer, but I have a condition. Name it. I want to start a program for kids dealing with loss, teaching them to work with their hands, to fix things, to build things. Sometimes grief needs a project, something you can see and touch and complete. Margaret's eyes glistened. Like Emma's helicopters. Like Emma's helicopters. Like the things I build when I can't sleep. Like the way your husband probably cleaned his weapons or maintained his equipment when he needed to think. William did do that, Margaret said softly. He'd spend hours in the garage organizing tools that were already organized, fixing things that weren't really broken. It's meditation for people who can't sit still, Jack said. For people who show love by making sure things work. What would you call this program? Jack looked out the window at Detroit's skyline, a city that knew about building and rebuilding, about finding purpose in the work of your hands. Tommy's Workshop, he said finally, if that's okay. More than okay. We'll fund it properly. Not a charity project, but a real program. Emma will be your first student if you'll have her. Emma, who had been quietly drawing in the corner, looked up. Will you teach me about Tommy? Not the sad parts, but the good parts. The things he liked to build. Yeah, kid, I can do that. The workshop space Margaret allocated was perfect. A ground floor room with high windows and plenty of natural light. Jack spent the weekend setting it up, installing workbenches at different heights for different aged kids, organizing tools in clearly labeled drawers, creating safety zones and project areas. Roberto and the maintenance crew volunteered their time, understanding that this was something bigger than just another company program. Monday morning, Emma was waiting for him at the workshop door holding a new blueprint. "I designed something," she said, unrolling the paper. It was a mechanical butterfly, intricate and beautiful, with wings that would actually move. "That's ambitious," Jack said, studying the design. "It'll take patience." "Dad said anything worth doing takes patience." "Your dad was right. Tommy used to say the same thing." Jack pulled out materials, brass and copper, and delicate springs. "Want to learn how to solder?" Emma nodded eagerly. They worked side by side in comfortable silence, Jack teaching through demonstration rather than words. Emma learned quickly, her small fingers surprisingly steady with the soldering iron. When she made mistakes, Jack showed her how to fix them, how to see errors as part of the learning process rather than failures. "Mr. Jack," Emma said suddenly, "do you think my dad and Tommy are friends now?" Jack's hand stilled. "I like to think so. Two brave kids looking out for each other. Tommy was only 6. Only 6, but he was wise. Near the end, he told me not to be sad forever. He said I should help other kids be happy since he couldn't be." Emma nodded seriously. "My dad would say the same thing. He always wanted to help people." By lunchtime, they had completed the butterfly's body and started on the wings. Margaret stopped by to watch, standing quietly in the doorway, as her daughter worked with complete focus, occasionally laughing at Jack's terrible engineering puns. "Mom, look!" Emma called out, holding up the partially completed butterfly. "It's going to fly just like Dad's helicopter, but different. A new kind of flying." Margaret's eyes met Jack's over Emma's head, full of gratitude, and something else, something that looked like the beginning of hope. That afternoon, 3 more children joined them, kids Margaret had identified through the company's employee assistance program. A boy whose father had died in Afghanistan, a girl whose brother had overdosed, another boy whose grandmother, who raised him, had recently passed. Jack stood before them holding a simple hammer. "First rule," he said, "tools aren't toys, but they're not scary either. They're just extensions of your hands, ways to make what you imagine become real." "Like my dad's helicopter," Emma added, already the workshop's unofficial ambassador. "Exactly. We're going to build things that matter to us, things that tell stories about people we love. And while we build, we'll remember that making something beautiful is the best way to honor someone who can't make things anymore." The new boy, Kevin, raised his hand. "What if we mess up?" "Then we learn to fix it," Jack said. "That's the most important skill I can teach you. Not how to avoid mistakes, but how to fix them when they happen." As the weeks passed, Tommy's workshop became the heart of something unexpected in Sterling Biotech. Employees would stop by to watch the kids work, often staying to share their own stories of loss and recovery. The mechanical butterfly Emma had designed became the workshop's symbol, mounted on the wall with a plaque that read, "New Ways of Flying." Jack taught them practical skills, but also practical philosophy. How to measure twice and cut once. How patience was more important than perfection. How sometimes the best solution was the simplest one. How grief was just love with nowhere to go until you gave it something to build. And in teaching them, he found himself healing in ways 5 years of solitude hadn't achieved. Every child who learned to use a tool properly, every project completed, every smile earned through accomplishment rather than empty comfort, these were victories that Tommy would have celebrated. The storm that would change everything began with paperwork. Jack found the termination notice taped to his locker at 5:15 a.m. on a Tuesday that started like any other. The letterhead was corporate crisp, the language carefully legal. "Effective immediately, your position has been designated for restructuring. Midwest Building Solutions will assume all maintenance responsibilities as of..." He didn't need to read the rest. Thomas Bradley had won, or thought he had. Jack folded the letter carefully and put it in his pocket next to Tommy's watch and Emma's latest blueprint. 30 years of keeping buildings alive, and it ended with a form letter that didn't even get his employee ID number right. Roberto found him an hour later in the mechanical room, systematically documenting every quirk, every bypass, every hard-learned lesson about Sterling Biotech's building. Hefe, what are you doing? Making sure whoever comes next doesn't kill anyone, Jack replied, photographing the junction box where three separate systems intersected in a way that violated code but worked perfectly. The backup generator priming sequence is in folder 7. Make sure they know about the server room cooling sequence. You're not fighting this. Jack paused his hand on a valve that had taken him 3 weeks to calibrate properly when it was first installed. I'm 52 years old, Roberto. I've buried a son, lost a wife, and spent 5 years pretending that keeping this building running was the same as being alive. Maybe it's time to stop. And the girl, Emma. That stopped him. In the past 2 weeks, since she'd first spoken, Emma had said exactly 47 words, all of them to Jack. All of them about mechanical things that served as metaphors for feelings she couldn't otherwise express. Yesterday, she'd asked him if machines felt pain when they broke. She'll be okay. Kids are resilient. Roberto looked at him with the disappointment of someone watching a friend give up. You don't believe that any more than I do. Before Jack could respond, the building's fire alarm erupted. Not the steady pulse of a drill, but the stuttering panic of an actual emergency. Jack's hands moved to his radio before he remembered it had been confiscated along with his building keys. Lab fire floor 23. Someone screamed down the hallway. The same floor as the freezer he'd saved where 10 years of research lived in delicate suspension. Jack ran. Termination or not, his body knew every corridor, every shortcut. He reached the lab in 3 minutes, finding chaos. The new sprinkler system installed by Midwest Building Solutions just yesterday, as a preview of coming improvements, had malfunctioned catastrophically. Instead of targeting the small electrical fire in one corner, it had flooded the entire lab. Water poured over sensitive equipment, irreplaceable samples, and most critically, the electrical panels that controlled the freezer systems. Dr. Chen stood paralyzed, watching his life's work dissolve. The sprinklers won't shut off. The control panel's locked out. Thomas Bradley stood near the door, phone pressed to his ear, his face pale. My brother says the system needs a factory reset. 45 minutes minimum. You don't have 45 minutes, Jack said, pushing past him. He grabbed an emergency axe from the wall. The water's going to hit the main electrical feed in about 30 seconds. When it does, you'll lose power to the entire building. You can't just destroy property. Bradley started, but Jack was already moving. The sprinkler system's brain was a computerized panel that Midwest had insisted was tamper-proof. Jack didn't tamper. He destroyed. 3 precise strikes with the axe severed the control module from its power source. The sprinklers died instantly, but the damage was spreading. Water had reached the secondary electrical systems, and Jack could hear the telltale hum of circuits beginning to fail. He dropped to his knees, ignoring the inch of water, and ripped open an access panel. Everyone out, he ordered. This is about to get dangerous. I'm staying, Dr. Chen said. So am I. The voice belonged to Margaret Sterling, who'd appeared with Emma in tow. The little girl broke free from her mother's hand and splashed through the water to Jack's side. The isolation protocol. Emma said, her voice clear and certain. From page 233. Jack understood immediately. She'd been reading his maintenance manuals, the ones he'd been writing for his replacement. Page 233 detailed how to isolate electrical systems during flooding, a procedure he'd developed after Detroit's last major flood. I need rubber mats, as many as you can find, Jack called out. And someone shut off the main breaker for this floor, but not the emergency circuits. What followed was controlled chaos. Jack and Emma worked in perfect synchronization, her small hands reaching into spaces his couldn't fit, following instructions that would have challenged a trained electrician. Margaret held a flashlight steady while Dr. Chen and Roberto hauled equipment away from the spreading water. Thomas Bradley watched from the doorway, his phone silent in his hand. 20 minutes later, the crisis was contained. The lab had suffered damage, but the critical research was saved. The building's electrical system remained intact. And in the middle of the watery chaos, a 9-year-old girl who'd barely spoken in 5 months was calmly explaining to her mother why the building's original wiring plan was superior to the improvements Midwest had installed. Their system doesn't account for cascading failures, Emma said, pointing to the ruined sprinkler controller. Jack's systems all have manual overrides because he knows computers fail, but physics doesn't. Margaret Sterling looked at her daughter, really looked at her perhaps for the first time since William's death. How do you know all this, sweetheart? Jack teaches me, not with words, with drawings and demonstrations and letting me help. Like Dad used to. Emma's voice wavered slightly on the last words, but she pushed through. Dad would have liked Jack. They both understand that fixing things is how you say, I love you, when words don't work. The silence that followed was broken by slow, deliberate applause. Everyone turned to see Mr. Yamamoto, the Japanese investor standing in the doorway. I came for a facility tour, he said in carefully accented English. Instead, I see something much more valuable. I see what makes American companies great. Not systems or certificates, but people who care more about the work than the credit. He walked through the water to where Jack knelt, still holding the axe. You are the terminated maintenance supervisor. Yes, the one Mr. Bradley says is too expensive to keep. That's right, Jack said, standing slowly. Yamamoto turned to Margaret. Mrs. Sterling, in Japan, we have a concept called shokunin, the craftsman's dedication to perfection. This man embodies it. If you let him go, I will withdraw my investment. That won't be necessary, Margaret said, her voice carrying the steel that had built a billion-dollar company. Mr. Bradley, you're terminated effective immediately. Security will escort you out. Bradley's face cycled through several colors. You can't do this. The board approved the restructuring. The board approved cost savings. They didn't approve nearly destroying 10 years of research to save $1. She pulled out her phone, typing rapidly. I'm calling an emergency board meeting. We'll see who they support, the VP who nearly destroyed the company or the maintenance chief who saved it. This isn't over, Bradley said, but he was already backing away. Yes, Margaret said quietly. It is. After Bradley left, Margaret approached Jack. Water still dripped from equipment. The lab looked like a disaster zone, and somewhere in the building, millions of dollars in damage was being calculated. But she was smiling. Mr. Sullivan, I owe you an apology and an offer. Not just your job back, but a new position, Director of Operations. You'd oversee all building systems and have full authority over any contractors we bring in. Jack looked at Emma, who was carefully drying his tools with paper towels, treating each one like it was precious. I appreciate the offer, ma'am, but I have a condition. Name it. Tommy's workshop stays and expands. We make it official, funded with proper equipment and space. Agreed. What else? I want Roberto as assistant director. The crew stays intact. No outsourcing without my approval. Done. And Emma continues as my unofficial consultant on all building systems. Emma looked up, her eyes bright. Really? Every building needs someone who listens to it, Jack said. You hear things others miss. Margaret nodded. All agreed. When can you start? I never stopped, Jack said simply. The board meeting that afternoon was less battle than coronation. Security footage of the morning's events had already circulated, along with documentation, showing that Midwest Building Solutions, Thomas Bradley's brother's company, had a history of catastrophic failures in other buildings. The board voted unanimously to retain Jack and his crew with a substantial raise for what they diplomatically called specialized institutional knowledge. That evening, Jack stood in Tommy's workshop with Emma and the 12 other children who now attended regularly. Word had spread through the company and beyond. Parents who'd lost children, children who'd lost parents, all finding their way to this space where grief transformed into creation. Today, Jack announced, we're starting something special. Each of you is going to build something that tells a story. Not just any story, but the story of someone you love. Kevin, the boy who'd lost his grandmother, raised his hand. What if we don't know what to build? Then we start with what they loved, Jack said. Emma, tell them about your dad's helicopter. Emma stood more confident now than she'd been weeks ago. My dad flew helicopters to help people, so I build helicopters. But each one is different because each memory's different. This one, she held up her latest creation, has extra bright lights because Dad was afraid of the dark when he was little, just like me. The children absorbed this understanding, spreading across their faces. They weren't just building things. They were building connections. As the months passed, Tommy's workshop grew from a single room to an entire floor. Margaret had thrown the full weight of Sterling Biotech behind it, bringing in child psychologists who marveled at the progress, educators who documented the unique approach, And most importantly, more children who needed what Jack and his team offered. Jack taught them carpentry, electronics, plumbing, metalwork. But more than that, he taught them that broken didn't mean worthless, that patience was more powerful than perfection, and that sometimes the best way to honor someone was to keep building, keep creating, keep fixing what you could reach. One day, Margaret found him in his office, which he'd reluctantly accepted, but decorated with tools and Emma's drawings rather than diplomas and certificates. "You know the board wants to franchise this," she said. "Tommy's workshop in every major city." Jack looked up from the mechanical butterfly he was adjusting, the one Emma had designed that had become their symbol. Tommy would have liked that, helping kids everywhere. "There's something else," Margaret said, moving closer. "I wanted to thank you, not as CEO, but as Emma's mother. You gave me my daughter back. She was never gone. She just needed someone who spoke her language." "No, it's more than that." Margaret sat on the edge of his desk, a surprisingly informal gesture. "You showed both of us that moving forward doesn't mean forgetting. William's been gone almost a year now, and for the first time I can think about the future without feeling like I'm betraying his memory." Jack set down the butterfly, giving her his full attention. "He'd want you to be happy." "Would Tommy want you to be happy?" Jack considered this. "I think he'd want me to be useful. Happy might be asking too much. What if you could be both?" Before Jack could respond, Emma burst through the door. "Mom, Jack, come quick. Kevin finished his project." They followed her to the workshop where Kevin stood beside an elaborate wind chime made from salvaged copper pipes. When the wind caught it, it played a melody haunting and beautiful. "It's the song my grandma hummed when she cooked." Kevin explained, tears streaming down his face. "I thought I'd forgotten it, but when I was cutting the pipes to length, I heard it. Each pipe is a note, and together they make her song." Jack put his hand on the boy's shoulder. "She'd be proud." "You think so?" "I know so. You took something broken and made it sing. That's the best kind of magic there is." That evening, after the children had gone home, Jack and Emma worked together on a new project. Not a helicopter or a butterfly, but something else, a scale model of Tommy's workshop itself, complete with tiny workbenches and miniature tools. "Why are we building this?" Emma asked. "Because sometimes you need to see what you've built to understand what you've accomplished," Jack replied. "And because I want to send pictures to other cities to show them what's possible." Emma nodded, then asked quietly, "Do you think my dad and Tommy would be friends?" "I know they would be." "How do you know?" Jack smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. "Because they both love kids who ask hard questions and build impossible things." Margaret appeared in the doorway, having stayed late as she often did now. "Am I interrupting?" "Mom, look." Emma showed her the model. "We're building Tommy's workshop inside Tommy's workshop. It's like those Russian dolls, but with meaning." Margaret laughed, the sound bright and unexpected. "Very philosophical for a 9-year-old. "I'm almost 10, Emma corrected. "And Jack says philosophy is just thinking about thinking, which is what you do when you're building. You think about thinking about building." Margaret met Jack's eyes over Emma's head. "She's getting too smart for both of us." "She always was," Jack replied. "We're just catching up." Later, as they cleaned up, Margaret asked, "Would you have dinner with us Saturday? Nothing formal, just pasta and conversation. Emma insists you haven't lived until you've tried her spaghetti sauce." Jack hesitated. It had been one thing to share meals in the workshop, surrounded by projects and other children. This felt different, more personal. "Please," Emma added. "I want to show you Dad's workshop in our garage. Mom hasn't been in there since, but I think it's time." Jack looked between them, mother and daughter both healing, both reaching out. "All right, Saturday." Saturday evening found Jack standing outside a modest 2-story house in Grosse Pointe, holding a bottle of wine he'd spent 30 minutes choosing, and a small wooden box he'd made years ago, but never shown anyone. Emma answered the door before he could knock. "I was watching from the window," she admitted. "Mom's nervous. She changed clothes 3 times." "Emma." Margaret appeared slightly flushed. "Don't tell all our secrets." The house was warm, lived in with photos of William everywhere, but not overwhelmingly so. They were integrated into the life of the home part of the story, but not the whole story. Dinner was indeed Emma's spaghetti, which was surprisingly good for a 9-year-old's cooking. They talked about the workshop, about the other children, about plans for expansion. It felt easy, natural, like pieces of a puzzle that had been waiting to fit together. After dinner, Emma led them to the garage. Jack expected dust and abandonment, but instead found a perfectly maintained workshop, tools cleaned and organized with military precision. Dad liked to build things too, Emma explained. Not helicopters, but furniture. He made this. She ran her hand along a beautifully crafted rocking chair. For when I was a baby. Jack examined the chair with professional appreciation. This is excellent work. He understood wood grain, how to work with the natural patterns instead of against them. Like you do with the building, Emma said. And with us. Margaret stood in the doorway watching them. I haven't been in here since the funeral. I couldn't bear it. But Emma comes here every week, keeps it clean, keeps it ready. For what? Jack asked. Emma answered simply. For when someone needed to use it again. Dad wouldn't want his tools to get lonely. Jack pulled out the wooden box he'd brought. Speaking of tools, I made this a long time ago. Never knew who to give it to, but I think your dad would approve. Emma opened it carefully. Inside, nestled in felt, were a set of miniature tools, perfect replicas made with incredible detail. They're beautiful, Margaret breathed. Tommy and I were going to make a dollhouse for the children's hospital, Jack explained. These were for the workshop inside it. We never got to finish, but maybe. We'll finish it, Emma said firmly. At Tommy's workshop. All the kids can help. For the hospital. Margaret moved closer to Jack, her hand briefly touching his arm. William would have liked you. You both understood that making things is a form of prayer. They stood together in the garage workshop, surrounded by the tools of one good man, holding the legacy of another, while a little girl planned a future that honored both. 3 months later, at the 1-year anniversary of Tommy's workshop, the dollhouse was unveiled at Children's Hospital. It was magnificent, 3 feet tall, perfect in every detail, with a tiny workshop where miniature tools waited for miniature hands. A brass plaque read, For Tommy and William and all the brave children, may you always have something to build. Jack stood with Margaret and Emma watching sick children marvel at the creation. Emma had added something special, a tiny mechanical butterfly that moved between rooms powered by a watch spring that would never need winding. It flies forever, she explained to a little boy with leukemia. Like hope. Dr. Patterson, the head of oncology, pulled Jack aside. 3 of our kids have asked about joining Tommy's workshop when they're better. You're creating something special. Just teaching kids to build, Jack said simply. No, you're teaching them to live. There's a difference. That evening at the celebration dinner, Margaret stood to make a toast. The room was full, the entire maintenance crew, dozens of families from the workshop, Mr. Yamamoto, who'd flown in from Tokyo, even Linda, who'd sent her blessing, if not her presence. A year ago, Margaret began, my daughter hadn't spoken in 5 months. I thought I'd lost her along with my husband. Then a maintenance man taught her that silence could be productive, that grief could build rather than destroy, and that broken things could be made beautiful. She raised her glass to Jack. To Jack Sullivan, who keeps buildings running and hearts beating with equal skill. Jack stood uncomfortable with attention as always. Tommy would have been 7 this year, old enough to use real tools to build real things. I can't give him that chance, but I can give it to every kid who walks through our doors. That's not compensation, it's continuation. And I think maybe that's enough. Emma tugged at his sleeve, and he bent down so she could whisper in his ear. He smiled and straightened. Emma wants me to add something. She says the best builders aren't the ones who never make mistakes. They're the ones who know how to fix them. And the best people aren't the ones who never break. They're the ones who learn to build something beautiful from the pieces. The applause was warm and sustained. But what mattered more to Jack was the small hand in his Emma's fingers, squeezing tight, and Margaret's eyes meeting his across the room with something that looked like tomorrow. Later, as the party wound down, Jack found himself on the building's roof, the old helicopter pad where he'd first met Emma. She was there too, along with Margaret, the 3 of them looking out over Detroit's lights. The city looks like a circuit board from up here, Emma observed. All connected, all working together to make something bigger work. That's a good way to see it, Jack agreed. Margaret stood between them, her presence warm and steady. I've been thinking about what you said, about continuation rather than compensation. Yeah, I want to continue too, not replacing what was lost, but building something new with what remains. Jack understood what she was asking, what she was offering. He thought about Tommy, about William, about all the broken pieces that had somehow formed this strange, beautiful pattern. Buildings need maintenance, he said finally. Regular care, constant attention, someone who understands their quirks and loves them anyway. Is that a yes? Margaret asked. Emma answered for him. It's a yes, Mom. Jack doesn't say yes with words. He says it by showing up every day and fixing what needs fixing. 6 months later, Jack Sullivan married Margaret Sterling in Tommy's workshop, surrounded by tools and projects and children who understood that building something together was the highest form of hope. Roberto was his best man, Emma was the ring bearer, and the rings themselves were carried in a box made from wood from William's workshop and metal from the building's original construction. The ceremony was simple, the reception joyful, and the toasts were about resilience and repair rather than fairy tales and forever. Because everyone there understood that life was about maintenance, not magic, and that the best love stories were about people who chose to keep choosing each other day after day, repair after repair. During the father-daughter dance, Jack danced with Emma to a song she'd chosen, Blackbird by the Beatles. Halfway through, she looked up at him. You're not my replacement, Dad, she said clearly. You're my bonus dad, my building maintenance dad, the one who keeps everything running. Is that good? It's perfect. Dad flew helicopters and you fix buildings. Between the two of you, I've got the sky and the ground covered. Jack laughed, spinning her around. What about the in-between? That's what Mom's for. She's management. As the evening ended and the guests departed, Jack Sullivan stood in the workshop that bore his son's name, surrounded by a family built from loss and reinforced with love. Tomorrow there would be systems to maintain, children to teach, and a building to keep breathing. But tonight, in this moment, everything was running exactly as it should. The brass pocket watch still sat in his jacket, stopped at 3:47 p.m. 5 years ago. But for the first time, that felt right. Some clocks weren't meant to move forward. They were meant to mark the moment when one story ended, so another could begin. And this story, built from broken pieces and patient repair, was just beginning. Because that's what maintenance men do. They keep things running, especially hearts that have every reason to stop. And sometimes, if they're very lucky and very patient, they get to build something new from the pieces, something stronger and more beautiful than what came before. In Detroit, a city that knew about breaking and rebuilding, in a building that breathed with mechanical precision, in a workshop named for a boy who would never grow old, Jack Sullivan had found what he thought was lost forever: purpose, family, and the knowledge that the best repairs are the ones that make things stronger at the broken places.